Hey there. Are you ready for some military-grade ASMR? Well, you're in for a real treat, as we'll be having a look at the only gun to ever be issued with a moustache and a pack of cigarettes. A French gun that changed the course of weaponry forever, and an inspired Soviet gun that went to war with the world twice, and at this rate, maybe even a third time. I'll smoke him if you got him, so you don't have to. Today, we'll be looking at the French 75 and the Soviet 76mm M1902. We begin in 1897 with the Canon 260 cans, or saucy can to the Americans, or sexy cans to others. It was hard to pronounce. You might know it as the French 75mm Canon. Why are you talking about old ass guns again, you ask? To understand the M1902, talking about the French 75 is more efficient and interesting, as it's largely what the M1902 is based upon. The French 75 is basically the New Testament of field artillery. It revolutionized artillery and large caliber guns forever, so much so that the French 75 is still relevant for the next 50 years through both world wars and all the wars between. What made it revolutionary was the recoil system and the self-contained ammo. To be more specific, the hydro-pneumatic recoil mechanism patented by Konrad Hausner, a German engineer at the time who worked for Krupp, the German weapons manufacturer. Konrad designed an original recoil-absorbing mechanism, but when presenting his idea to superiors at Krupp, they deemed it impractical. Soon after, Konrad quit Krupp, took out a patent for his device, and went to work for Ehrhardt. Ehrhardt were a smaller manufacturer at the time. For those needing a reference, this was like Xerox rejecting the GUI, the computer mouse, the Ethernet, and laser printer because the executives deemed it infeasible. So how did a German design end up in French hands? Well, information on a gun made 130 years ago can be complicated. Let's just say the French were inspired after seeing a demonstration of the weapon by a reseller in 1894. They saw the principle in action, but Konrad's mechanism had a flaw in that it utilized springs rather than gas. The French army secretly developed a piston and gas solution, and the French 75 was born in 1897. The other major improvement for the French 75 was the self-contained ammo that was slowly circulating through the fields. Prior to this, guns needed to have the shell and propellant charge loaded separately, which complicated reload speeds. Why was the recoil system so groundbreaking, you might ask? Well, it didn't exist at the time, not in a meaningful way for large caliber weapons. Prior to the 75, large guns had little to no recoil management aside from the weight of the gun itself to counteract the shock from the blast. This meant artillerymen would need to re-aim the gun after each shot, as the entire gun would shift per shot, which took the reload speed way up. The mechanism was treated as a state secret, with the artillerymen not even being allowed to open the mechanism. Even until 1917, the French guarded the gun's secret from their American allies. In comparison, the 90mm field gun workhorse of the French army fired a mere 1 to 2 rounds per minute. The French 75 could deliver a sustained rate of 3 to 4 HE and shrapnel rounds per minute. Because it was a direct fire gun, it only had an elevation of 18 degrees. With a highly trained crew, the French 75 could deliver 15 to 30 shells a minute. That's a lot of service targets, and a lot of satisfied customers. By 1940, 21,000 had been produced. The Americans loved it too, with their manufacturing starting in 1918, with 1,000 being built by the end of World War I. Now we can talk about Soviet guns, the M1900. To be brief, the M1900 was the first Soviet cannon to feature a recoil mechanism. However, it wasn't efficient, and this unit saw limited production between 1901 and 1903, with a total of 2,400 guns being manufactured. Lastly, we can talk about the M1902. The gun was created at the Pulovsky Works in St. Petersburg and was designed with all the modern features of the era, including the recoil mechanism, the self-contained ammo, The moment it hit the front lines, it replaced the M1900. It was produced between 1903 and 1931. It had an elevation of 17 degrees and fired 10 to 12 rounds per minute, or 1 round every 5 seconds, with shells traveling at 589 meters a second and a maximum fire range of 8.5 kilometers. It used your stock standard 76x385 ammunition, which was pretty much everywhere at the time. This is why you'll find the M1902 all over the European history, as it saw heavy usage in the interwar period and even World War II. Before moving forward, I thought it would be important to talk about caliber. What is caliber? What is that L number next to my gun? It's a means to standardize gun volume or value. Technically, it's the barrel length divided by the diameter of the bore inside the barrel. Here we have all 3 guns, the M1900, the M1902 and the modernized M1902 40. The M1900 and the M1902 have in-game ranges of 180 meters and muzzle velocities of 580 meters a second. The calibers in the ammunition and armor pen of the M1902 are the same. However, the M1902 40 has a higher armor pen, yet uses the same ammo. It has a higher in-game range of 190 meters and a muzzle velocity of 660 meters a second. So bigger shells, more gas, more bang? Not always. The secret's in the L. Here's the 57mm ZIS-2 with a caliber of 72.9. It has the highest pen and highest caliber, yet the smallest shell with a muzzle velocity of 990 meters a second. The barrel is thinner, but longer. However, it was noted for shooting straight through lighter armor without causing much damage because it was so effective at piercing armor. Higher caliber isn't always better, but usually it's better within the same nation's cannons during the World War II period. Seeing as we're in the rabbit hole of caliber, we may as well talk about armor pen. Now, to answer your question, Mr. Bra 7895, in the interim I'll attempt to demonstrate a more general approach on shooting tanks. As a point of reference, think of a tank as a can of beans, and you're a hungry soldier, armed only with a 2mm BKF AP, a 2mm butter knife. Naturally, you lunge the piece at the can at an angle that is most perpendicular to the surface to avoid a ricochet, and unevenly distributing your hard-won kinetic energy into separate parts. Secondly, you would fire your fist at 6 meters a second at the top of the can, where the armor is the thinnest. Similarly, a tank has various angles and surfaces of varying thicknesses. The top of the can is usually the equivalent to the sides or the back of the tank, where the armor becomes progressively thinner. Broadly speaking, calculating the probabilities of a shell opening the tank, involves normalizing both the armor surface and the shell's kinetic energy as 2 quantities. These 2 quantities are 2 parts to an equation which I'll reserve for a more special video. As you can imagine, the shell itself affects these coefficients of the calculations, as well as the quality of armor. To address the second part of your question on how to make it explode, the Soviet tanks of World War II after the T-35 typically had their shells on the floor, as the designers prioritized a smaller tank profile. This meant the Soviets liked to keep their treasures buried beneath them, making it a little hard to hit a specific spot. And if you're going up against Germans, their tankmen usually hid their treasures on the side and upper sides of the tank, as the designers prioritized rate of fire and accessibility. Both nations had shells in ready-to-reach locations in the turret, but being a bit of a Tonkman myself these days, I've had better consistency striking the sides. Speaking of Tonks, a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode was brought to you by Tonk's Premium Instant Coffee. Winners know when to keep going, even after a hard day of salvaging. That's why I keep my call-in status stocked with Tonk's Premium Instant Coffee. When my call-out comes home, they're always 1 cup away from victory. Tonk's Premium Instant Coffee. Taste the victory.
I hope I've addressed some parts of your question, Mr. Bra. If you'd like to see more exploding tanks and vehicles, I recommend checking out my tests and guides playlist. If you see the word test in the video, you can be guaranteed there are going to be tanks exploding. Speaking of exploding tanks, let's do the M1902 weapons test. We'll be using the M1902 firing APHEBC. This time we'll speed up the process by firing concurrently and delivering value in bulk. As usual, the bars behind the tank represent maximum frontal armor thickness in 20mm buckets rounded up. More bars means more armor. If the weapon fails to remove the crew in 2 shots or less, 2 vehicles in a row, it's disqualified. We'll begin with the side armor first, where the armor is the thinnest. The M1902 is disqualified. Now we'll do frontal armor where the armor is the thickest. The M1902 is disqualified. So as you can see, the M1902 is an effective anti-tank weapon up until roughly 1941, when the armor starts becoming thicker. Anecdotally, I've had 1 or 2 of these in my lineup and have often been surprised at the results, as a lone well-positioned M1902 can often be left to take care of business. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. I hope you learned something today. If you liked the video, leave a like. I'm working my way through some suggestions, but if you'd like to see a weapon looked at, leave a comment in the comment section below. The war is long and it may take some time, but I'll get to it eventually. Until next time, cheers.